The night air was bitter and unforgiving as Jack shuffled down the empty streets, his breath forming ghostly clouds that vanished into the cold darkness around him. The city seemed asleep, but the biting wind carried with it the distant sounds of a restless world. Jack wrapped his thin-worn coat tighter around his frame, each step heavier than the last. His shoes were tattered and soaked from the earlier rain, but still he walked driven by a hunger not just for food, but for a spark of hope that had long evaded him. Tonight was colder than most, the kind of cold that sank deep into bones and whispered threats of endless suffering. Jack had spent countless nights like this, sleeping on benches in alleys, or in the small shelter he rarely trusted. Too many years living on the streets had hardened his heart, but beneath that rough exterior was a man who once dreamed of a better life. Tonight, as he trudged past a row of shuttered storefronts, his eyes caught a flicker of movement under, a broken bench curiosity pulling him closer. He crouched slowly, careful not to startle whatever was hiding there. A tiny creature cowered, trembling uncontrollably, its small frame barely covered in patches of matted fur. Jack recognized it instantly, a bobcat kitten no bigger than a loaf of bread. But this one was different. It was desperate, hungry, and freezing its eyes wide and wild, reflecting the pale glow of the streetlight. Jack's heart clenched. The kitten looked like it had been abandoned. Left alone to face the cruel night without protection, Jack hesitated for only a moment before he took off his only blanket, the one ragged thing he owned, and carefully wrapped it around the fragile kitten. His hands were rough and scarred, but gentle. As he pulled the kitten close, trying to share the little warmth he had, the kitten pressed itself against him, clinging, as if sensing Jack was its only chance of survival. The streets felt colder now, as if the city itself was watching this unlikely. Jack found a secluded corner beneath an old awning, shielding them from the wind. He sat down slowly, keeping the kitten wrapped tight, hoping that maybe, just maybe, this small act of kindness could change something. He whispered softly words. He hadn't spoken to anyone in years, promising the kitten that it would be safe here. As the night deepened, the silence around them grew heavier. The only sounds were the occasional scurrying of rats and the distant howl of a dog somewhere far. Away, Jack's eyes kept drifting toward the shadows, as if expecting danger to emerge from the darkness. At one point, the kitten twitched, suddenly alert. Its ears perked up, listening intently to something Jack could not hear. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and a chill ran down his spine. He looked around, frantically searching for the source of the kitten's alarm. But there was nothing there, only the cold, empty street and the flickering streetlights casting long, eerie shadows. Jack felt a creeping unease gnawing at him, as if some unseen force was watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. The blanket around the kitten was growing damp with Jack's sweat, but he refused to let go. Every muscle in his body was tense, ready to protect this tiny life no matter the cost. The night stretched on endlessly, and with each passing hour the cold seemed to seep deeper, threatening to freeze them both alive. Jack wondered if the warmth he was sharing was enough to save them, or if they were both doomed to perish in the unforgiving darkness. Suddenly, a faint noise broke the silence, a soft rustling coming from the alley beside them. Jack's heart jumped, and he tightened his grip on the kitten. The sound grew louder, a scraping sound like claws against concrete. His mind raced, trying to imagine what creature could be making such a noise in this abandoned part of the city. Jack stood up slowly, his eyes scanning the shadows, the kitten now silent and still in his. Arms seeming to sense the rising tension, Jack took a cautious step toward the alley, peering into the darkness, his breath catching in his throat. As he stepped closer, the flickering light revealed a figure lurking just beyond the edge of the street lamp. A shape moving too fast to be human. The hairs on Jack's arms rose as he tried to make sense of what he saw. A pair of glowing eyes reflecting the light, and a low growl that sent shivers through the night air. The kitten stirred again, pulling away. Slightly to hiss softly at the shadow, Jack's mind reeled with fear and wonder. What kind of creature would come for the kitten now? Would it be a threat, or a sign of hope in this desolate place? Jack swallowed hard, trying to steady his shaking. Hands! His pulse thundered in his ears as the figure moved closer into the faint glow, revealing jagged fur and sharp claws, before disappearing suddenly into the darkness. leaving only the echo of its growl behind Jack, stood frozen for a moment. His breath caught in the cold air. The kitten nestled back into the blanket, its eyes wide and wary. Jack's thoughts raced with 1,000 questions, but no answers. The night seemed to hold its breath as if waiting for what would come next, and Jack knew deep down that whatever happened in the next few hours would change everything for him and the tiny creature in his arms. The dawn crept slowly over the horizon, bathing the city in a pale gray light that barely chased away the darkness of the night. Jack sat huddled beneath the broken awning, clutching the Bobcat Kitten close to his chest. The blanket was damp and heavy, but the kitten now seemed stronger, its small body moving with a cautious energy Jack had never seen before. The sharp contrast between the night before and the fragile hope of morning filled him with a strange mix of dread and anticipation. As the first rays touched the cold pavement, Jack noticed how the kitten's eyes flickered with a wild intelligence. The creature that had been barely alive just hours ago was now alert, watching the world with a new hunger, a fierce determination that both frightened and fascinated Jack. He had never imagined that something so small could hold so much life inside. Jack's mind was spinning with questions about where the kitten had come from and what dangers lurked in the shadows beyond. But before he could even begin to form a plan, a sudden loud noise shattered the quiet morning. A harsh cry echoed from the alley nearby, piercing the stillness like a knife. Jack's heart leapt in his chest, and he tightened his grip on the kitten, instinctively shielding it from whatever was coming. He rose unsteadily to his feet, scanning the alley where the cry had come from. The light was weak, and flickering shadows danced on the walls, making it hard to see clearly. But as Jack edged closer, he saw a gathering crowd, a mix of curious onlookers and wary passers-by, their faces a mix of fear and fascination. The center of the crowd was a large bobcat caught in a trap, its massive body struggling against the cruel metal that bit into its flesh. Blood stained the concrete, and the creature's eyes shone with pain and fury. Jack's breath caught as he stared at the injured animal, a powerful wild beast trapped and desperate for freedom. The kitten in Jack's arms twitched suddenly, as if sensing the connection between itself and the larger creature. Jack's thoughts raced, trying to understand what this all meant. Was this bobcat the kitten's mother or protector? Could the small creature really survive on its own? Or was this a sign that danger was far greater than he had imagined? Jack moved through the crowd, pushing past frightened faces and murmurs of warnings. The air was thick with tension, and the faint scent of fear mingled with the cold morning breeze. When he finally reached the trap, he could see the bobcat's ragged breathing and the raw wounds around its legs. The beast's strength was fading, and Jack realized time was running out. He searched desperately for something to free the bobcat, but the heavy trap was locked tight, and the people around him seemed frozen in helpless fear. Jack's hands trembled as he fumbled with a piece of metal torn from a nearby dumpster, hoping against hope to jimmy the lock. But every moment lost meant more pain for the suffering animal, and the crowd's whispers grew louder, filled with doubt and despair. Suddenly, the bobcat let out a low, guttural growl, a sound filled with warning and sorrow. Its eyes locked on Jack, and then flicked toward the kitten still wrapped in his blanket. A surge of understanding passed between them, a silent message of protection and survival that made Jack's heart ache with both fear and resolve. Without thinking, Jack made a decision. He would not leave the bobcat trapped to suffer not when he had found a way to care for one of its kind, before the kitten's tiny claws dug into his chest as if urging him to act, and Jack knew this was no ordinary animal. This was a bond deeper than words. Just as he was about to try again to free the trapped bobcat, a sudden shout broke through the crowd. A man pushed forward, yelling that they should call animal control or the police. Jack's gaze hardened, and he shook his head, refusing to let the authorities take the wild animal who might never understand or forgive them. But the crowd was divided, and tension flared like a storm about to break. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as the situation grew more chaotic. The bobcat's growls turned louder and more desperate, while the kitten hissed warningly from his arms. A sharp crack sounded nearby, and Jack spun around to see a figure stepping out of the shadows, a stranger whose intentions were unclear, but whose presence made the hairs on Jack's neck stand on end. The stranger's eyes gleamed with something dark and unreadable. As he moved closer, The crowd parted, giving him room like they were afraid or expecting something terrible to happen. Jack took a step back, clutching the kitten tighter, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. The morning that had begun with fragile hope now seemed poised, on the edge of disaster. The stranger spoke low and calm, promising help and safety, but his voice carried an undercurrent of menace. Jack didn't trust him, but the crowd seemed willing to listen. Fear and desperation hung thick in the air as Jack faced a choice: stay and fight for the bobcat and the kitten, or retreat into the shadows where survival was lonely but certain. The bobcat snarled fiercely, breaking free for a moment, writhing against the trap, its strength faltering but its spirit unbroken. Jack's heart shattered, watching the wild animal struggle, and the kitten pressed close as if drawing strength from its fierce relative. The moment hung suspended between hope and tragedy. Then, without warning, the stranger lunged forward, reaching for the bobcat's trapped leg. The crowd gasped and scattered some screaming warnings, while others froze, unable to move. Jack's mind raced, searching for a way to stop what was happening. But before he could react, a sharp cry echoed through the alley, and everything changed. The sharp cry echoed through the alley like a gunshot, cutting through the tension that had been building for hours. Jack's heart pounded wildly in his chest, his breath catching in the cold morning air. He felt the bobcat beneath him tense, as if it sensed something beyond the chaos unfolding around them. The stranger's eyes narrowed, and he stumbled back, surprised by the sudden interruption. The crowd around them seemed frozen for a moment, caught between fear and hope. And the kitten, in Jack's arms, hissed fiercely, refusing to be silenced. Jack scanned the shadows, trying to find the source of the cry, but the alley was a tangle of shapes and shifting light. The bobcat growled low, warning everyone to stay back, but Jack knew the creature was vulnerable, trapped and bleeding. The stranger's hands clenched into fists, and his gaze flicked nervously toward the darkness, like he expected something worse to emerge from the gloom. Suddenly, a figure stepped forward from the shadows. A woman, her face streaked with dirt, but her eyes blazing with determination. She pushed through the crowd, ignoring the shouts and the frightened gasps. Her voice was steady and commanding as she spoke directly to the stranger, saying enough that whatever game he was playing was over. The stranger hesitated, a flicker of anger crossing his face, but the woman held her ground. Her presence seemed to shift the mood of the crowd from fear to defiance. Jack felt a surge of gratitude even as his mind screamed that danger was far from over. The bobcat's growl softened as if recognizing the woman's strength, and the kitten nestled closer to Jack, as if drawing courage from the shifting energy. The woman knelt beside the trapped bobcat, carefully examining the wounds, her hands surprisingly gentle despite the urgency. Her name was Sarah. She explained, a wildlife rescuer who had been tracking this particular bobcat for weeks, aware that it was in trouble but unable to reach it until... Now, Jack listened intently, his hope growing with every word. Sarah's knowledge and calm confidence gave him a sliver of belief that maybe they could save the creature and the kitten too. But as Sarah worked to free the trap, Jack noticed the stranger's expression darkening. His eyes flicked from the bobcat to the crowd to Jack and the kitten. His presence felt like a shadow looming over the fragile moment of rescue, and Jack's instincts screamed that this was not over. The trap clicked open with a final harsh sound, and the bobcat limped free, gasping but alive. The crowd broke into murmurs, relief mixing with awe as the wild animal stood shaky but proud, its eyes locking once more with the kitten's. Jack's heart soared with hope, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was still lurking, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Sarah lifted the bobcat, gently cradling it as best she could, despite its size and wounds. She looked at Jack and the kitten with a nod, as if silently asking if he was ready to trust her to help the small creature too. Jack hesitated for a moment before slowly handing over the kitten, its tiny claws clutching his coat, as if reluctant to leave the only person who had shown it kindness. As they prepared to move away from the alley, the stranger stepped forward, blocking their path. His voice was low and threatening, warning them not to interfere and claiming the bobcat belonged to him, claiming it was his to control and exploit Jack's. Blood ran cold, realizing that this man had darker plans than anyone had guessed. The crowd tensed, ready for a confrontation, but Sarah stood firm, refusing to back down. She warned the stranger that any harm to the animals would be met with consequences. That law enforcement was already on its way, and that this time the city would not turn a blind eye. The stranger snarled and took a step closer, his intentions clear and dangerous. Jack felt the kitten squirming nervously in his hands, the small life, trembling as if sensing the threat rising around them. Suddenly, the bobcat growled louder, stepping protectively between Sarah and the stranger, its eyes blazing with raw, wild power. That moment, Jack understood the bond between the two creatures was deeper than mere survival. It was a fierce, unspoken loyalty and love that defied the harshness of their world. The kitten's small body stiffened, ready to defend, and Jack felt an overwhelming surge of courage flooding through him. Just as the stranger lunged forward, a distant wail of sirens cut through the tension, and lights flashed at the end of the street. The crowd parted hurriedly, and the weight of the moment shifted. Jack knew this was the turning point where everything would change, for better or worse. As the police and animal control arrived, the stranger vanished into the shadows like a ghost, leaving behind only the echo of his threats. Jack watched as Sarah carefully carried the bobcat and the kitten toward the waiting trucks, his heart pounding with a mix of relief and uncertainty. The day was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, Jack felt a glimmer of hope that kindness and courage could make a difference in a world that often seemed too cruel to bear. And as he watched the bobcat and kitten disappear into safety, Jack whispered a silent promise to himself that he would never forget the night when he shared his blanket with a freezing bobcat kitten and everything changed forever. Days slipped. By like whispers in the wind, Jack found himself standing on the edge of the city park, watching as the bobcat kitten played cautiously beneath the budding branches. The little creature was no longer the fragile, shivering thing he had found, but a vibrant bundle of wild energy, its fur gleaming softly in the pale morning sun. Jack's hands were still rough and calloused, but now they trembled slightly with a feeling he hadn't expected. Hope Sarah had invited Jack to visit the wildlife center where the bobcat and its injured mother were healing slowly under expert care. The thought had once seemed impossible, a stranger asking for help and being given it without judgment. But now Jack was learning that kindness could ripple out in ways that touched even the hardest hearts. The kitten had been named Luna, a fitting name for a creature that had survived the coldest night under the homeless man's blanket and now seemed destined to thrive. Her mother was named Willow, a fierce, wild spirit who had fought hard to protect her young and who now was slowly regaining strength with Sarah's help. Jack remembered the stranger who had tried to claim the bobcat, the dark shadow that had threatened to steal away everything. That man was gone now, a ghost in the alleys, the city's memory slowly erasing the threat he had brought. Sarah explained that the bobcats were protected now, and that the city was beginning to recognize the fragile balance between nature and human. Survival Jack found himself drawn into this world of rescue and renewal, a place where even broken things could find new life. He volunteered to help clean cages, deliver food, and sometimes just sit quietly nearby, letting the animals sense his presence. Without fear, it was a new kind of shelter, a place filled not with walls, but with hope and second chances. One afternoon, as Jack was walking along the wooded path near the center, he heard a rustling in the underbrush, the familiar flash of tawny. Fur caught his eye, and he stopped, frozen with wonder. A young bobcat appeared, cautiously watching him with curious eyes. Jack stood perfectly still, remembering the night he had shared his blanket with a freezing kitten, and marveling at how much had changed since then. Luna darted out from the bushes and leapt toward Jack, landing lightly on his outstretched arm, her purr like rumble vibrating through the quiet air. Jack smiled softly, feeling a connection deeper than words. The wildness in her eyes spoke of freedom, but also trust and a bond forged through hardship and kindness. Sarah appeared beside him quietly, watching the scene with a knowing smile. She told Jack that Luna was ready to be released back into the wild, a milestone that was both joyful and bittersweet. For Jack, it was a moment filled with pride and sadness, because it meant letting go of the creature who had changed his life so profoundly. The day of Luna's release dawned crisp and clear. The staff gathered. In the clearing near the edge of the forest, where the kitten's future awaited, Jack stood close, holding Luna gently one last time, whispering promises of safety and freedom. He could feel the tension in her small body, but also a readiness to face the world beyond. With a soft push, Luna sprang forward, slipping into the brush, her movements fluid and sure. She paused briefly, looking back at Jack, her eyes shining with a wild light that seemed to say, "Thank you," before disappearing into the shadows of the forest. Jack watched her go, feeling a mix of loss and hope swelling in his chest. He realized that kindness was a gift that could not be measured by possessions or status.